Slasher movies. There are few greater divides in cinema than the hatred and adoration for this blood-spewing genre. From debates of who's the OG slasher, to whether or not these movies should even be considered art. But what is it about these movies that have people split so heavily down the middle? That question has a little bit more to it than you might think. Let me take a stab at it. To start, let's talk about who's the real OG of slashers. Now, this discussion's brought up a lot, and a lot of people tend to talk about Michael Myers from John Carpenter's Halloween. And while that could be debated, Michael is the epitome of slashers as we know them today, that being the unkillable murder machine that just spills the blood of everything that gets in its way. With a 78 release date, Michael's not even close to being the OG. I mean, if it's not Halloween, then it must be Psycho, right? And while that guess is significantly closer, this masterclass of suspense directed by Alfred Hitchcock isn't exactly on the nose OG. And by that I mean, with a September 8th, 1960 release date, it was beaten out by almost 5 months. Almost on the day. So what beat it? On April 7th, 1960, a movie directed by English filmmaker Michael Powell was released. What movie was that? None other than the psychological thriller Peeping Tom. For those who don't know anything about this movie, you're definitely not alone. I was also among you until about 3 years ago when I did a deep dive into horror and found out about it. So, for anyone who doesn't know, let's take a second and talk about it. Peeping Tom is about a serial killer who carries around a camera to videotape his victims' final reactions. While that's probably considered normal nowadays, and some weird twisted fantasy, back in the 60s, cameras weren't as common as they are nowadays. But why don't we know more about this movie? Well, there's a number of reasons for that. But one of the mains is probably the fact that it was bombed by critics, to the extent of almost ruining Powell's career. But why are we talking about this movie now? Well, it probably has something to do with the resurgence of it. It's now considered a cult classic, and even ranks among the top 30 of British films made, that being from Time Out magazine, and ranking among the top 80 best British films ever made by the British Film Institute. So why else did this fail? It seemed like a good movie. It was hated at the time, but nowadays it's revered. Why don't more people know about it? That probably has to do with the movie we already touched on. Psycho.
Why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
As stated before, Psycho only came out 5 months after Peeping Tom. So why was it so much more popular? Well, in my opinion, it's because Psycho really broke the mold of horror movies at the time. The twist alone was enough to really get word of mouth going, and really get butts in seats in those theaters. And that was only multiplied when it was nominated for 4 Academy Awards. A feat that's, even till this day, extremely rare for a horror movie. But why do people love and hate these movies so strongly? And for that, there's really not an answer. You can really only draw on your own personal experience with either these movies or other things in your life to sway your opinion. Now, I'm not going to leave it at that. Of course, we're going to talk about some of these opinions and why I might not necessarily agree with the negative side. So let's start. Reason 1. Reason 1 is that they're all just bloodbaths. This argument is extremely common against slasher movies specifically, and really at this point I don't think holds a lot of weight for 2 main reasons. 1, that's kind of the point of slasher movies. That's the purpose of these movies. You're supposed to see a lot of blood and gore and private bits. That's also not the only thing slasher movies are. You see, this argument starts to fall apart rapidly when you introduce a movie with a little bit more nuance to it. For that, let's talk about the 1996 revitalization of the slasher movie, Scream.
Everybody, the suspect! Go!
Not scared, are you? Scream.
Now, Scream is a phenomenal movie, and you can turn your brain off and just watch the movie if you really want to. But if you really pay attention and put your mind to it, you start to realize how many small details the director Wes Craven put in this movie. Some of these details even tell you the twist at the end of the movie. Now, I'm not going to go into that right now. Maybe I'll make a video on it in the future if I see fit, but as of right now, I highly recommend going over to Zach Cherry's channel, link will be in the description, and check out his video of Who Killed Who in Scream 1996. It's a phenomenal video, really well made. I love Zach Cherry's channel. Reason 2. They represent extremes in violence and blood. For some people, these movies can trigger trauma, overwhelm, and overstimulate, and even to the point of triggering people's PTSD. And this is something that can't be argued against. You can't argue against someone's trauma. So this is an 100% understandable reason not to enjoy these movies. If they're too much for you, if they overwhelm you, if they make you uncomfortable, 100% a valid and supported reason. And no one should judge you for that. With that said, let's move on to reason 3. Reason 3, unoriginality. Calling slashers unoriginal is such a blanketed statement that it holds no weight and is damn near laughable. This is such an oversimplification of the genre, it becomes completely comedic. It's like saying Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street are the same movie because they have a guy killing people. It's flat out ignorant. But why do people love these movies? Well, I see myself as a slasher movie lover. I see myself as a slasher movie fanatic. And I'm definitely not alone. Stay tuned to the end of the video where I'm going to show some tweets from people I asked on Twitter why they love slasher movies. Follow me on Twitter if you want to be involved in these polls again in the future. While I could talk about this all day, to save your time, I'll stick to 3 topics. Let's get into them. Reason number 1. Horror is one of very few genres that you can really feel every emotion. From anger, sadness, frustration, annoyance, every emotion can be felt. And that's not common. You can feel the love of 2 characters. You can feel the hatred of 2 characters. You can feel sorrow when these characters pass. You can feel joy when these characters pass. There's a lot of emotions wrapped up in these movies. And not a lot of people talk about it. And that's one of the reasons I love horror. And I love slashers. Let's move on to number 2 before we're here for 3 hours. Reason 2. Slashers are so unapologetically themselves, you can't not love them. These movies aren't afraid to be different and push boundaries, and really, that's something we need in healthy doses in this world. Take Slumber Party Massacre 2, for example, one of my personal favorites. It's a movie of a dude in all leather, carrying around a guitar with a drill on the end, hunting down teenagers. With musical numbers.
Baby, do you like my sound?
Reason 3. Slashers have evolved so much over the years, constantly changing to get with the times. From the shock factor of Psycho, to the deep-rooted commentary of Get Out, and to the self-rooted satire of something like Behind the Mask, the story of Leslie Vernon. These movies aren't afraid to change. So there's a movie for just about everyone under the horror and slasher banner. So why are people so split about slasher movies? They represent the extremes of things. And there are really only 2 types of people who are gonna search these movies out. The people who love them for whatever reason, or the people who hate them for whatever reason. There's really not a big gray area for these movies, where people are gonna go see them just to see them. They're a little bit too niche for that. So what side do you fall on? Let me know in the comments. I personally am very happy with being a full supporter and lover of slasher movies. And I'm not alone. I reached out on Twitter and ask some people why they love slasher movies. Stay tuned, and you'll see some of the responses. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you had a great time. I had fun. And I hope to make more of these videos soon. I love you guys. Peace. Kingsley, don't you start making noises over there. Unless you're eating, then that's fine. Alright, I felt good about that one. That one felt alright. None of these feel great, but let's hope that they'll piece together to be, decent video. I can pray, right? But why don't we Why don't we watch it? Fuck. Excuse me.